Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. What up, Cammy? Welcome back. Happy Halloween.
Hi, happy Halloween, Bryant.
That's right. This is the last episode of the month of October, continuing on with our theme of talking about, I think it's turned into basically late 19th, early 20th century authors and their influential pieces that are spooky and or mysterious. Rolls off the tongue, right? So yeah, but it's been really fun. So we covered Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, and what was the other one? Oh yeah, Agatha Christie and Poirot, which was a lot of fun. That was last week's. So today is the final one. We're talking about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was written by Washington Irving, and yeah, he was born in 1783. So I think he's definitely the youngest or or oldest. He's the latest one that we did. Everyone else was more Victorian and early 20th century. But this is still really great. Cammy, you have a story for us, right?
I do.
Awesome. So Cammy, please regale us, and then we'll have a little discussion afterwards.
Absolutely. So I used Project Gutenberg to get the text for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. In the state of New York, just east of the Hudson, there sits a town so content in its own existence that the inhabitants seem in a state of torpor. The fog seems to always roll in from the misty river, but never leave, and its constant presence casts a dreary aura over the evenings. Many spirits make this place their home, but none so fearsome as the Hessian rider who searches the night for his missing head. Being a farming town, teachers were brought in from other places to instruct the children in all areas of education. One such man, Ichabod Crane, traveled there from his home of Connecticut and quickly became endeared to the townsfolk. He was a lanky man with a crooked nose, huge hands and feet, and arms so long they reached well past his coat sleeves. Ichabod's interest went well beyond the natural sciences. Reading and arithmetic, he had a healthy interest in all things occult, and spent many evenings with the older Dutch wives, and they spun wool and ghost stories so frightening that Ichabod could barely reach his home by horse without nearly falling off at every passing shadow. His mind weaved the tales he had heard over the roasting apples into various creatures before him in his path. But by daybreak, Crane was cured of his fears, and thirsted for more tales of the wild goblins and menacing ghosts that rested in the sleepy minds of the crones. Only one thought could pry him from the tendrils of the haunting stories. A woman, not just any woman, but the most beautiful woman in town. As rich as she was pretty, she caught the eye of many suitors, but Crane was intent on making Miss Katrina Van Tassel his wife. Our hero wasn't the only man with his eyes on Katrina. Brom Bones, a handsome and fit man with a wily sense of humor, was also in search of her hand. He wanted nothing more than to beat Ichabod in a fight, but Crane was too smart to be caught in such a one-sided affair, so Brom simmered in his jealous rivalry while they both sought Katrina's hand. After a particularly somber day in the town, Ichabod received an invitation to a ball that night at Van Tassel's estate. As soon as the 12 bells at noon tolled, Crane let his class out early so that he could get ready for the party. He washed his steed Gunpowder and saddled him, then freshened himself up with a hot bath. He wore his finest shirt and dress coat and set off for the party. Upon arrival, he immediately found Katrina and asked her to be his dance partner for the evening. Brom, showing up late as always, brooded in the corner over fancy cakes and meat pies and apple cider. And while Crane danced and made merry with the young Katrina, he couldn't help overhearing all sorts of tales of phantoms and spirits from the party guests. But he did not let those tales shake him, for he was going to ask for a hand in marriage that night. After the party ended, Ichabod lingered and asked to speak privately to his intended. They took to a parlor alone, but not moments later, Crane was seen leaving, sullen and crestfallen. And now his mind, grasping for anything that wasn't her, started to turn the ghost stories from the night into spectacular apparitions all around him. He urged Gunpowder to go faster, but the horse seemed cautious of the fog of night. Passing the well-known and very haunted Wiley Swamp, Ichabod swore he saw a figure, dark and large upon a steed in the shadows. He urged his own horse again to move, but Gunpowder merely sidestepped and trotted forward into the path of the daunting shadow ahead. As they approached, Crane could make out the specter as a man sitting firmly on his steed, his sword drawn, and Crane moved further up the figure to his neck. He jerked his horse's reins to the side and dug his knees into the ribs of the horse, for no manner of flight could be fast enough to run away from this form. It was Headless, the Hessian soldier. Gunpowder rode well through the brambles, speeding away from the fate they might share should the beast catch up to them. But just as they were making distance between themselves and their pursuer, the saddle snapped, and Ichabod found himself dangling from his horse's neck, the shadows close behind. As they reached the bridge out of town, which was said the headless rider could not cross, Crane looked back to see if the superstitions were true, and the Hessian would burn into flames should he ever cross the bridge. Crane caught a glimpse of the headless horseman raising his hand above him and hurling his own head at Crane. It was a solid hit to the temple, which knocked Crane off his horse completely. The morning came, and Gunpowder was seen grazing in front of Crane's abode, but the schoolmaster was not found. Weeks passed, and the town had come the entire outskirts to no avail. Some say he packed his things and left when Katrina refused his proposal. Some say his teaching job was coming to an end, and he headed back to Connecticut. But the old Dutch wives have a different tale, that Crane had been done in by spirits, and some nights you can see a faint flicker in the old schoolhouse and the sounds of Crane pining after dear Katrina.
Yeah, that's great. So, Sleepy Hollow, everyone knows that for the most part, right? I'm surprised though, I couldn't recall in an instant the author. I didn't know who the author was. And Washington Irving is his name. Like I said, he was born in 1783, died in 1859. So lived a long, full life just after the Revolutionary War. And he was really involved, and he was also a big writer. And he's certainly remembered in a lot of places through a lot of street names and things like that. But it's more so the work has been remembered than anything. And Sleepy Hollow is extremely popular. There are tons of cities and streets and things like that are named after it. And it's really cool. Irving was a lover of history, and especially coming in, he was named after George Washington. He ended up writing a biography of George Washington, and he was a scholar as well. He was a historian, and he liked to take. He really helped contribute to what we now call like romantic history, where it's like, I'm going to tell you about George Washington, but I'm going to fluff it up. Like, I'm really going to make it like fantastical and cherry tree and all that. It's like, well, you're not like, that could have happened. Is that important? But it sounds great. So that's really where he contributed to. And this story, written in 1820, was really famous. One thing I kind of put in my notes is after listening to several lectures on Victoria London and American identity done by Patrick Allen on the Great Courses, he talked about how in this time in the 19th century and late ancient century, as America was forming its identity, England was still, Europe was still like the arts. America, maybe, yeah, okay, industry and lots of lumber and all that jazz, but Europe was like home of the arts, and even through into the 20th century, it imported all the Europeans that came over are the only ones that had talent for Americans. But this guy, Irving, was really credited for being one of the most popular authors that got popular in Europe. And so that's something that's really big. He'd been writing for quite some time. He used to write in a way, Wikipedia says that it was similar to how Mad Magazine works. He wrote for a newspaper, and he lived in New York. He was born there. And so he kind of wrote like a farcical and sarcastic about New York. He even gave it the nickname Gotham. This is where Gotham comes from.
Weird.
Gotham is an old Anglo-Saxon word meaning goat's town, which totally makes sense. Like Ham is, like Nottingham. Yeah. Anyway, so
goat's town.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So Batman's protecting all the goats, right? But he spent a long time in Europe. He had a very busy late life. He was ambassador to Spain in 1840, but when he went to Europe, I believe he was in England or France when some diplomat of some kind was like, "Come to Spain with me and do Spanish things." And so he did, and he went to Spain, and he became really interested in Spain's recent history. He wrote like a biography or history of Christopher Columbus, which he what it was a bunch of historical documents were just kind of made public, and he had one of the first opportunities to look at these. And it was like one big thing from this was that he, through Christopher Columbus's notes, Christopher Columbus would say how he believed the world to be round, basically, when Irving's contemporaries thought the people of Columbus's time thought the earth was flat. So this was a time to sort of understand the mindset of the 15th century and things like that. And he also wrote a deep history on Spain and its Moorish Muslim rule. He actually ended up writing a biography of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, even too. So,
oh, wow.
yes, yeah, this guy was super into it. What's funny though is a lot of his critics of the time, or a lot of the critics of the time, including Edgar Allan Poe, were quite critical of him. A critic in the New York Mirror wrote, this is from Wikipedia, "No man in the Republic of Letters has been more overrated than Mr. Washington Irving." And
it sounds like jealousy to me.
You know, I think so. I think it was like right place, right time, and pioneering a lot of things. Like he didn't necessarily, he was just kind of like one of the first to do a lot of these things. Like maybe not the best, but he just, and even, going to Sleepy Hollow seems to be a combination of a lot of stories. So we have some elements of things like the Scandinavian wild hunt. We have just some German and Anglo-Saxon folklore of specters in the night, that kind of thing. But it has sort of a modernness to it as well. There's connections to the Revolutionary War as well, with the Dutch settlements of America, famously being around New York, battles, rumors of specters and things like that. So I think that this is just a really great way. It doesn't seem to kind of directly copy anything like you might expect from certain things at the time where there's less, copyright infringement coverage and things like that. But he seems to really just kind of take some really good ideas, but create an original story. I mean, you can't really copyright specters,
Right.
And it's really interesting. And the Hessian soldier, that was so interesting. The Hessians were like, the House of Hesse was just a famous German, house. The Germans were lots of scattered territories for so long, including this time period, very warlike. That was the way Germany was for quite some time into the 20th century, even. So it was just really cool and spooky. And we just talked about Mary Shelley. That was a few years later, but they, rich people like to just sit around and say ghost stories, German ghost stories. So it totally makes sense. And Sleepy Hollow being the name of the valley, and it brings it to New York. Again, it's well written. It's something you'd expect that would be like a European story, but it's also very American in a lot of ways. But it was respected by the Europeans, which I just think is really important to think about as well. And
because that was, you said it was written right after. Or no, he was born right after the revolution. Is that what you said?
He was born in 1783. So he was in the boom of it all. I mean, he was totally right in the middle of it all. And he was, during the War of 1812, he was a young adult and wrote this soon after that. So, this
would be important for other countries to kind of respect.
Yeah, he was exactly. This America was always, like I said, even into the 20th century, like especially in music, from Alett's Great Courses lecture, the great musicians that were in America producing music were European. They were not, there wasn't Americans, that came later. There was no Lady Gaga in the 1920s.
Unfortunately for them.
I know. Can you imagine? But yeah, it's great. And of course, not that it was super popular, as it were, but of course, Disney did a famous version, animated version of it. It was like a part of a collection. It was The Adventures of Ichabod Crane and Mr. Toad or something like that. And funny enough, that was
so good.
Yeah. And do you know who narrated it?
No,
Bing Crosby narrated it. I thought that
that
was
makes
really interesting.
sense.
Yeah. So it was a total hit of its time, further like pushing it. And it was like several stories at once. And that's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was in a collection of essays called The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, written while he was in England. So he was in England, being influenced, wrote a collection of essays, and this was sort of one of them. And was
Yeah,
published as a
it is
collection.
very English. The way the story is written is very
Yeah.
English.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, and that's, it's tough. 1783. We have like a colonial identity, but so much of it is influenced by Britain. But there's a unique American thing, which is the British influence, the colonial influence, but more. So I just think it's really interesting. I think Irving is really interesting because he may not have written the deepest, most earth-shattering. He's not Shakespeare by any means, but he just did a good job of sort of in his time modernizing a lot of things. He was a big supporter of writing being its own profession and copyright protection. Copyright, there was nothing. You could easily reprint crap. It was really bad at the time. This was like when they had the least protection for those sorts of things. And so having him push it to be a profession too, like let that make your living, was a big thing. But yeah, he spent time in Europe. He one really big thing he did too was he in an 1812 revision to A History of New York, he he kind of came up with this dream sequence of Saint Nick flying in a wagon and being like he kind of invented Santa Claus in a way, the way we kind of know him to be now, where he flies around magically and gives presents. He was just very imaginative. And again, think of that romantic history part. It's like, well, St. Nicholas is real and we celebrate it in a lot of ways. And I might give you gifts on Christmas, but he's flying now, like that's what he's just like, we got to make it bigger, like that's how that was like the computer graphics overload that we have today in like Michael Bay films. This is him. This is how he was able to do it. He was like, yeah, what if Saint Nick was flying? That's the way he did it. Or what if the horse threw pumpkin heads at people? So I think that the critics, I love reading that he was critiqued like that and that people thought he was overrated. He very well could have been, especially if you're someone like Poe and you're like a fine arts, like, no, we must write work that people cannot understand except the well-educated and things like that. He definitely was like, nope, Ichabod Crane, it's going to be down to earth. It'll be appreciated. It won't be like, a Penny Dreadful kind of thing. It'll be something of substance, but it'll be approachable and public and taken in by everyone. So I was really happy to learn more about Irving and the sort of the background to Sleepy Hollow. And Cammy, I think you did a great job of summing it up in a wonderful way. There's tons of different cartoon representations, and the Disney film is great. It's definitely in the public domain, so you
Yeah,
can
there's
absolutely
that
read it.
Johnny Depp movie too.
That's right. Yeah.
And
After you're done,
apparently there was another movie.
really? Oh, I'm
Yes.
sure. I'm
With
yeah.
Ian Malcolm. Ian
Oh,
Malcolm?
okay.
What's his name?
Ian McKellen?
No. From Jurassic Park.
Oh, I think
What?
I know who you're talking about.
Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mr. Crane, I'm throwing this pumpkin at you. Start running. No, sorry. That's my Goldblum. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, once you're done watching Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein, starring
Which
Robert
I
De Niro,
found on VHS.
starring Robert De Niro as the monster, you can flip over to either Johnny Depp or Mr. Goldblum doing Sleepy Hollow. So, everyone, thanks for joining us. October's always fun. Cammy, your story was great as always. Thank you for coming back on your own show. Everyone, let us know what you think. We've got some really fun stuff planned for the rest of the year. Let us know if you have any suggestions, though. We've actually got a fan suggestion coming up on our next episode. Make sure you're checking out the link tree in the description that has all of our social media stuff. You can keep in the group on Facebook. Email us directly at Mythstorie at gmail.com. Mythstorie spelled like how I'm pointing on the video with an IE at the end, not to be confused with Mythstoire, which is what I always end up typing, our French bureau. I think that's all I've got, though, Cammy. Anything you'd like to add?
I was trying to overlay something, but it didn't work.
No, that's okay. All right, everyone. Well, again, happy Halloween. Take care of yourselves. We will see you next time.